Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, man, I thought that I would talk about the second fight that I have to talk about today that ended up happening yesterday. It's Saturday evening. And of course, this was the decently big fight between Vergil Ortiz and Egis Kavaliauskas. Vergil Ortiz, of course, is one of the bigger up and coming stars in all of boxing when it comes down to it. I've seen him ever since, well, can't remember necessarily the first fight that I seen him in, but he certainly is on the rise. His last couple of opponents, I wouldn't necessarily call them A-class fighters, but he is clearly stepping up in competition. He beat Maurice Hooker, I believe, last time in this fight. He also faced man, I'm trying to think who else. There was another fighter that wasn't too bad of a name as well that he fought, but I can't remember overall the name. Anyways, this dude that he was going to fight today, Egis Kavaliauskas, it certainly was going to be an interesting fight. We've seen the amount of trouble that Egis Kavaliauskas was able to give Terence Crawford, and I thought that actually when that fight happened, that Egis Kavaliauskas was able to hurt Terence Crawford a couple of times. In fact, I actually thought that he knocked Terence Crawford down, but the referee ended up calling it a slip. I think a similar thing happened here as well because I thought Vergil Ortiz, I thought that he ended up getting knocked down in the second round against Egis Kavaliauskas, but the referee called it a slip. But it is what it is. Vergil Ortiz, he did get hurt a couple of times in this fight, but that doesn't really alarm me too much because Egis Kavaliauskas, he is a decent fighter. He can punch. But the thing is about Egis Kavaliauskas, he reminds me of a fighter back in the day. And for those of you overall that watch boxing in the early 2000s, you know overall who I'm talking about. This one fighter named Demarcus Chop Chop Corley. Demarcus Chop Chop Corley was one of the best gatekeepers around. He was a fighter that would always give a certain amount of the top tier fighters a lot of trouble. Like he gave Miguel Cotto for however long the fight lasted, he gave him hell. He also gave Floyd Mayweather hell in some of those rounds. In fact, actually, Demarcus Chop Chop Corley, he hit Mayweather with a punch that nearly knocked him down on his ass. For those of you overall that remember that fight. But when it comes down to it overall, the thing is about Demarcus Chop Chop Corley, no matter how talented he was and overall how physically talented he was never going to win those big fights. And it's the same thing with Egis Kavaliauskas. Egis Kavaliauskas is a guy that can give you some trouble. He's got decent power. He's got decent athleticism. But he's not going to win any of those big fights. He's a person that's just too flawed. And on top of that, he doesn't have the stamina and the wherewithal to get through some of these bigger name opponents. So it is what it is. So Egis Kavaliauskas, it was a decent fight for Vergil Ortiz. I think it's going to teach him a couple things. But Egis Kavaliauskas is not someone that's going to beat anyone elite anytime soon. It's just not going to happen. So it is what it is. But as for Vergil Ortiz, I thought that he looked good tonight, pretty much just like he did every other night. Vergil Ortiz in his past couple of fights has been getting hit a little bit more, but I'm not really too overly concerned because he is stepping up a little bit in competition. Of course, they're not necessarily A-grade fighters, but when it comes down to it, they are fighters overall that can give you some problems. And Vergil Ortiz has been able to knock both of them out, I believe, within 8 rounds, so I'm not really too overly concerned about it. I thought Vergil Ortiz looked decently good here. His defense, even though he did get hurt a couple of times and hit here and there, I do think that his defense still is pretty damn decent. He reminds me a little bit of a bigger version of Mikey Garcia. Maybe not as skilled as a Mikey Garcia, but someone overall who's very, very talented. And of course, he has that A-grade power. Vergil Ortiz is a very, very big problem for some of these guys in the welterweight division. Vergil Ortiz said that he would like to face the winner of Sean Porter versus Terence Crawford. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight. I'll tell you what, Vergil Ortiz would be a very big threat to either of them if he overall were able to get a fight with them. So I would personally love to see that fight. We'll see what happens there. As personally, I mean, what fight would I like to see him in next if he doesn't get that fight? I'd like to see him in a fight maybe against Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia would be a very interesting fight. If Yordenis Ugas ends up losing to Manny Pacquiao, maybe a fight against Yordenis Ugas, one of those guys. Vergil Ortiz, I know the welterweight division, it seems very, very talented right now, and maybe that Vergil Ortiz is going to be very, very hard for him to become champion, but I wouldn't underestimate this guy. This kid, overall, he's got a lot of talent, he's got a lot of power, he's got good defensive ability, and for him overall being this early on in his career and displaying this skill set, I would say that I'm very, very impressed with him. He's not a person overall to where I see a lot of the same flaws in Vergil Ortiz as I see usually a lot with, a lot of Mexican or Mexican American fighters, which sometimes means flat feet and sometimes means not the best head movement. But Vergil Ortiz, he doesn't seem to really have those problems. So Vergil Ortiz, I'm very impressed with him. I've really been very impressed with him from day one. But the way that he was able to handle Egis Kavaliauskas, come back from getting hurt a couple of times, and the way that he was able to stop him a little bit later on, I think Vergil Ortiz is a very, very good fighter. I think he's a very good fighter. I would personally love to see him maybe get a title shot next or overall fight one of the top contenders. I would love to see him face Danny Garcia, Yordenis Ugas, the winner of Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter, or Sean Porter next, because Vergil Ortiz versus Sean Porter, to me, that's an interesting fight, and I'm not really sure who would win that one. So I'd love to see it. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what y'all thought, and I'll talk to y'all later.